Gearheads know that some projects need so many parts, it feels like you need a whole storage unit just to store them. That's what eBay Motors' 122 million parts are for. Think of it as your virtual parts garage. They've always got the right fitment at the right prices. Use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo Ador Jr., your host, and I am with my friend Devin Gleisner. Hey man, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, I'm actually surprised you got my last name pronounced right the first time. A lot of people don't. Yeah, my name is Devin Gleisner. I go by Leo Phileas on YouTube. I do science education and science communication from an atheistic perspective. A lot of refuting arguments of creationists and intelligent design proponents.
Awesome. Okay, can you talk about more on what you dive into the specifics in your YouTube channel, I guess? Yeah.
So I cover a lot of topics in astrophysics, cosmology, and quantum mechanics, because there are a lot of aspects of these subjects that are often misconceived, especially with quantum mechanics. And there are a lot of science communication channels out there. Well, a lot of them are good. They do a pretty good job. But one thing I've noticed is that a lot of them still use language that really feeds into the misconceptions that people have about these subjects. So my goal is to parse out the more complex details of these subjects in a way that actually properly represents what the science and what the mathematics is really saying.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So you mentioned it's from an atheistic perspective, right? But why do you have to mention atheism in it? If it's just, like if you're coming from a purely scientific one, it doesn't have to be atheistic or theistic. It just has to be to presuppose the scientific method and the principles that science believes in, I guess. So why mention it?
Because that's part of the purpose of my channel, is to talk about these things from the perspective of an atheist, to explain the science.
Why?
Because that's what I choose to do. Most science communication channels don't talk about science from either a religious perspective or a non-religious perspective.
But I guess why do you think it's necessary to make this your purpose? I guess you could just focus on science if you want, but why I guess I wouldn't call it militant atheism, but I guess why with this specific niche, I guess?
I wouldn't say it's necessary. It's just a personal preference.
Okay,
kind of set myself apart from other science communication channels.
Okay, cool. Okay, so in terms of that, right? Because you're, I guess, anti-religion in terms of its relation to the scientific perspective and studies, right? So, why do you think that religion is a problem if it interferes with these types of research and studies and fields?
I would say that it's not that I necessarily think religion is a problem until
Mm-hmm.
it begins to deny the science, like in the case of creationism, which denies the thoroughly established evolutionary theory that literally no professional biologist on any college campus would ever
Mm-hmm.
would ever try to deny.
Mm-hmm. I guess in terms of what the creationists say, I know like a lot of them have PhDs and stuff too. Like they are very qualified, right? But in terms of what they claim and how they propose it, I guess that they do put it in a way that it's not something that can be falsified, right? For example, they tend to lean on philosophy and presuppositions like principle of actuality and stuff like that. So it's really hard for to make testable predictions that counter all of these. What do you think?
No, yes, yeah, I think that's one of the points of creationism is that they try to be unfalsifiable because they know they can't prove themselves correct. So they just hope that they can structure
Yeah.
their worldview in a way that it can't be proven wrong. And that's literally the antithesis of science.
Okay.
Science, by definition, is falsifiable.
Okay, but other than the creationists, right? Like, what else do you fight against? Or I don't know if it's fight, but just like what is the direction that you move against in terms of your channel?
Religious misconceptions of science.
Okay, is that all, or
So, like, thinking that the universe is finely tuned, or that the origin of the universe required a supernatural creator, or that quantum mechanics proves that consciousness supersedes physicality. All of these things are gross misconceptions of what the science actually says that aren't adhered to by the vast majority of relevant professionals in those fields.
Interesting. Okay. So I would like to dive into your worldview, like your metaphysics, your positions on cosmology, axiology, if that's all right. And I would like to ask you first, why do you think God doesn't exist?
Well, mainly because we know that God, the idea of gods in general, were invented by humans, very, very primitive humans with an extraordinarily limited understanding of reality. This is evidenced by all of human history and the ways in which we used gods to explain another supernatural forces and entities to explain things that humans simply didn't have the technological capacity to explain at the time. And as we have advanced technologically and scientifically, all of those things have begun to be explained natural. It's also the fact that nobody has ever directly or verifiably observed, measured, detected, contacted any sort of God from any religion. Then you have the problem of, well, if a God does exist, which one is it? How do you know it's there? How do we verify that it's there? And for me, the idea of a God existing is just as likely, I guess you could say, as the idea of dragons existing. I guess nobody can really say that they don't, but the chances of them actually existing seems to be quite slim.
I guess in what you just said, like there are rational arguments that prove that God doesn't exist. Therefore, God doesn't exist.
I wouldn't say that prove that God doesn't exist. I think that there's reasons out there that one can make that I would say reduce the probability of a God or gods existing.
Okay, like it's just like all comes razor. That's just how you.
Yeah.
Okay, so but it's not that you're making it that or making a claim that it is what ultimate reality is, but only that this is what the current evidence is saying, that there is probably no God, right? In terms of how it is currently defined.
Yeah, in a sense.
Okay. Anyway, so other than that, so it's a God exclusive worldview. So what about cosmology, right? So are you an idealist, physicalist, dualist? You're probably like purely materialist, I guess, in terms of.
I am a naturalist, yes.
Okay, cool. So basically, what are your position on the nature of reality, right? As being natural. So, is it a multiverse thing, or we just don't know? Like, what would you say?
Ultimately, we don't know, but I think the chances of there being a multiverse are very slim. Most cosmologists, while maybe entertaining that idea don't really take it seriously, mainly because any other universes external to ours are unfalsifiable, and science does not deal with unfalsifiable claims. As to the nature of reality, I think that Carl Sagan, the late astrophysicist and cosmologist, worded it best. There isn't any objective meaning or purpose to the universe's existence. The universe just is. And that's all.
I guess so. Well, when we talk about cosmology, right, we start also to discuss like the contingency argument and all of that. What would you say? Like when a theist makes a claim that everything that begins to exist has to have a cause, what would you say?
I would point to a few examples of particular states of affairs that begin to exist but do not have causes. Well, first off, I would state that the whole concept of beginning to exist hasn't ever actually been observed. People might say, well, you can watch a house begin to exist by watching construction workers put the house together. But you're not watching a house begin to exist. You're watching material that already exists get transformed into a house. So the material was already there. Nothing really began to exist. On top of that, there are events that happen, namely at the quantum mechanical level of reality, that do not have causes. Weak radioactive decay is one of these processes. Quantum tunneling is another one. Proton tunneling would be a good example of that. And vacuum field fluctuations, or quantum fluctuations as they're often worded. None of these events have causes. They're all stochastic. So the whole idea of causality being a law or a principle that applies to reality universally is, quite frankly, not exactly true.
Well, I guess that's pretty problematic, though, right? Because the scientific method is based on observation, which is presuming that the universe is universally or structurally modeled to be to have a cause and an effect, right? To be linked, I guess. So I would call it it's just a correlation, but in terms of how we understand it, we do take it as that something was an effect and had a cause, right? That's how science works. We make observations, detect testable predictions. So to say that everything we haven't observed anything that begins to exist is actually contrary to what we see in science, or the concept of science itself.
I would have to disagree.
Okay. Why?
Namely because of the first law of thermodynamics, which states that matter and energy cannot be created or destroyed. So if I picked up a pencil and then split it in half, do I still have the pencil? Most people would say, yeah, you still have the pencil. So if I chopped it into a million pieces,
okay, so let me clarify here. So you're using the first law of thermodynamics to disprove the contingency argument, right?
No, to me, the contingency argument is essentially asking the question, why does anything at all exist? It seems that the universe is contingent upon something else. And I would argue that the contingency argument makes the presupposition, rather unjustifiably so, that the universe is contingent on anything else to begin with.
Okay, so
question I don't.
Okay.
Number one, I don't have answered that question. I also don't think that science could, and I don't think that humans could.
No.
Excuse me, I don't think.
Yeah.
Of verifiably answering that question.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of how you defined it, I would say that your position is that the universe is, I guess, by definition, eternal, right? Like it doesn't have a beginning, but it might have an ending, I guess. If I don't know how you would word it.
Eternal isn't the word that I would use. I would state that the universe is tenseless.
Tenseless. How would you define that?
That the tenses past, present, future don't mean anything. The universe is one object that just exists. It's never not existed. It will never not exist. It's just there. It exists.
So it didn't come up from nothing. It's just, I would say the eternal word fits still, right? Like it's so.
In some senses, yes.
Okay. So it's an eternal universe. Okay, fine. So,
but the reason I don't like the word eternal is because it gives people the idea that the universe could be extended infinitely into the past.
Yeah. Okay, so it's not infinite regress, because tense presupposes time, right? And we don't know if time existed before or after or whatnot. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, quite frankly, I think it's rather nonsensical to say that there was time before time. I think
Yeah.
it's just a logically self-contradictory statement.
Okay. So other than that, in terms of your metaphysics, right? Like, I would say that there are, like, humans cannot escape properly basic beliefs, right? That I always tell that to my guests. Like, even if you're an atheist or a theist, there are things that you presuppose in order to think like a normal human being, right? Like, for example, we have no proper justification to believe in the law of causality, that thing, like, like that the next thing would produce this outcome, and a lot of other stuff too, like that skeptics or epistemological nihilists would disagree with. But I guess what would you say about the metaphysics, right? So do you think that the universe is modally structured? That it's like
what exactly?
it's like it obeys these laws and will always obey these universal laws, right? Like, for example, I guess.
What I would say is that the universe just does what it does, and us existing within it, we are capable of observing and defining and quantifying what it does, and that in doing so, we have observed that, generally speaking, the universe appears to be consistent in how it mechanistically operates.
Okay. But but I guess in terms of proper justification, we have no reason to believe why the universe does that, but it just appears to be that way to us.
I would agree.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay.
Just how we that's just what we have seen thus far in our observation and quantification of.
Cool. Okay, I want to talk about your epistemology, right? So in terms of that, how do you claim to know? So you're a naturalist, so I would say that you would only rely on like the scientific method, to actually assure that you know something, even if it's not infallible, but it's still something that could reflect what is ultimate reality. What would you say?
I rely on mathematical axioms and logical axioms as well. I don't think the scientific method is the only method through which humans can attain knowledge. I do think it is one of the most reliable, but I don't think it's the only one that's reliable.
Okay. So, by the way, about like mathematical axioms, right? So, would you say that that mathematics is prescriptive of the universe, or it's descriptive? Like when I say,
I would take the position that the vast majority of mathematicians, logicians, and philosophers of mathematics take that mathematics is a human abstraction that describes the universe. Mathematics is not a transient or transcendent entity that tells reality what to do. It is a tool humans developed to describe the reality in which they reside. It does not tell that reality what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to do it.
Okay. So, so you use math, I guess, logic and scientific studies, like I guess an interdisciplinary attempt at truth, right? So,
Yes.
let's try an experiment. Like, I want to know how you apply it to, let's say, your position on abortion. Like, let's just set an example. It's not really something that specific to this topic, but how would you apply these epistemological methods in order to make or decide your position on whether you're pro or against or what that? I guess it's diving into axiology and ethics, right? But
yes.
Okay.
And I was just about to say, when it comes to something like abortion, I wouldn't utilize something like the scientific method or mathematics to determine.
But you do use it in part, right? In part, it is included?
No, I would say that I use pretty much exclusively ethics to determine whether or not that's something that I feel should be allowed or not.
Why do you think it's not included though, right? Like, for example, if you're purely naturalist, right, then you can only rely on what to you is material. And like, for example, what is a fetus, or what is pregnancy, and what is the definition of pain or whatnot. So how would you...
Yeah, but I think humans can define those things within a naturalistic worldview just fine.
Okay. Well, how would you...
I don't think that non-naturalistic worldviews have a monopoly on how we can define emotions and mental states and other thing, and morality and ethics. I just don't think that's I don't think that's an epistemologically justifiable position, quite frankly.
Okay, so I guess like I would like to hear how you would form your arguments on your position on abortion, if that's okay, bro.
Well, for me, I look at it, like I said, from an ethical standpoint, and I'm all about freedom. Okay. I absolutely love freedom. I love it when people are able to do what they feel is best for them. And I think that regardless of how I feel about somebody, that they should be able to, within reason, carry out their life the way that they see fit, the way that they feel is best for them. And so with that comes something that's referred to as bodily autonomy, the ability, essentially the idea that somebody has the ability to make decisions for themselves, what goes into their body, what comes out of it. Kind of like, I like to make a parallel here, if I may. I compare the abortion argument to that of the vegan argument. I'm not a vegan. I would never be a vegan, but I don't believe that I have the right to tell vegans that they have to eat meat, or that they can't be a vegan. Just like I might not agree with a person going and getting abortion, but I don't feel that I have the right to tell that person whether they should be allowed to or not, because it's not my body, it's not my life. That is their decision to make, regardless of whether I agree with it or not. Just like with a vegan, I might not agree that people shouldn't eat meat, but it's not my decision to make for you. That is your decision to make.
Okay. So in terms of how you describe your ethics, right? Your moral code, you have, I guess, virtue ethics on freedom, or you value liberal ideas and concepts like autonomy. And so what are your moral axioms though? Like, how would you know what you want, or what is right or wrong in your moral code? Or is everything just permissible or just intuitional to you? Like, does it have to be logical or rational, or is it just like depends on your preference? How do you form that?
For me, when it comes to morality, that's something that I have to try to, what's the word I'm looking for? My morality is something that I would say has to be explained within my epistemological framework.
Yeah.
So I would apply morality. I don't know if this is the right way to word it, but I would apply it differently to different scenarios based on the type of scenarios. I don't think every scenario involves the same sort of moral or ethical examination. So I would look at maybe abortion differently than I would look at, say, chopping down a tree, or I might look at killing somebody who had just shot down 500 people differently than I would look at killing somebody who got in a street fight and ended up beating the other person to death. So I would argue that the different scenarios warrant different moral or ethical examinations and thus conclusions to be reached.
Okay, so in terms of your moral code, it's sort of inconsistent, I guess.
I wouldn't use it inconsistent.
How would you use it? I guess it changes, but it changes depending on the situation, what the situation calls for.
If somebody walks into a jewelry store and steals a $5,000 watch, that person should be punished. But let's say they're 25 years old, they walk into a jewelry store and they steal a $5,000 watch, that person should be punished. But if a homeless 9-year-old child walks into a grocery store and steals a loaf of bread, I don't think that person should be punished. In both instances, the action was the same. They took something that was not theirs, but I would argue that the way that we should examine that from an ethical framework or from a moral framework is different, because the scenario is different and the potential justifications for why the person engaged in the action they did are different as well.
Okay. So let me get this straight though. Like, I guess it's the same thing, right? In every scenario that you mentioned, it's stealing, right? But with different circumstances and different agents, right? And with different intentions. So what would be the changing variable in those equations? Is it is how the person did it? I guess the intention of the agent is
I'd say it's more the intention. In the former, the person is stealing something that's very expensive because they want it. It's not something that's a necessity. Whereas in the latter scenario, this is something somebody is stealing because it is a necessity to the sustenance of their existence.
Okay. So in terms of intention, right? How do you judge whether an intention is bad or good or wrong or right?
I would judge that based on its ability to maximize health, happiness, or well-being. Or whether it diminishes health, happiness, or well-being.
What kind of okay, so I guess it's very subjective in terms of how you would define well-being and happiness, right? Like that guy searching for stealing a watch in a store, a jewelry store, could be trying to maximize his well-being and happiness, right? Like how would you define it? Maximizing happiness and optimizing well-being.
I would define that as things that make people feel better about the nature of the world and the nature of their existence within it. I mean, some people might be able to say, well, somebody's stealing a watch, that makes them happier. Well, yes, but that doesn't justify doing it. Just like, well, this person murdered my mom, but if I murder them, it'll make me happier. Yes, but you're also at the same time diminishing somebody else's health, happiness, or well-being. And in fact, diminishing their ability to exist at all. So it's just, there's a lot, for me, within any particular instance, there are numerous different aspects that one has to examine to consider whether an action should be judged moral or immoral or ethical or unethical. And I don't think that it can be really, whether an action is ethical or moral can be pinned down to one particular thing that somebody did, at least in most instances.
Okay. But in terms of that, I would say that by how you defined it, it's ultimately subjective, right? Like,
yes, I am a moral subjectivist. I do believe that morality is inherently subjective.
Okay, so like Hitler could be right to himself, but you could be right to you. But ultimately, in the end, it's just power struggles, right? Whoever wins is right. Basically, what a postmodernist would look at it. Is it would that be right?
I mean, I guess I can't really answer to that. I don't really know much about postmodernism. I wouldn't consider myself a postmodernist.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'm not saying you're a postmodernist, but in a worldview where morality is subjective, right? Whoever wins ultimately, who has the better power, could present themselves as the right one, but ultimately it's just subjective.
I think they can present themselves that way, but I don't think it necessarily means they are right.
Yeah. I'm not saying that, but they're right to themselves. But I guess in terms of societal policies and whatnot, that's what I'm referring to, right? Like because of moral subjectivism. But okay, fine. I won't contest that. Well, okay. So I would like to ask you more on how you would look at, let's say, what other topics you cover on your YouTube channel. Like, I think it's really interesting that you're really focusing on the atheism and science and like countering religious falsehood, and claims on science. So what other topics do you talk about there?
A little bit of politics, left-leaning politics. And when I say left-leaning, I'm talking more what would be considered socialist politics, because I am a socialist, a market socialist.
Interesting. So, politically, can you describe or elaborate more what a market socialist is for the audience
So
who doesn't know.
a market socialist is somebody who believes in establishing a democratically controlled economy that preserves, at least to some degree, or at least temporarily, the market structure that is there, which would relate more to sort of the commodity form of the economy. So they don't believe, essentially going one step further to what would be more of a more pure Marxian form of socialism, teetering on getting close to communism, would be socialism that also abolishes the commodity form, or the commodification of products and services in the economy, which would lead to the abolishment of markets.
Yeah, okay.
So I believe in establishing a socialist, which really just means democratic control of the economy by all of its participants. So I believe in establishing a socialist structure of our economy within the framework of markets, while preserving markets.
Okay. So in terms of the most ideal, I guess, or the country right now who has the closest principles that they are applying and implementing in their social policies and also political policies, what country would that be? Would it something like Scandinavian countries, or?
I honestly don't think that there is one, because contrary to what a lot of conservative, especially paleo-conservative-minded individuals think, there hasn't really ever been a socialist country on this planet.
Yeah.
Most of the countries operating, practically all of the countries with some structured economy operating on this planet today are capitalist.
But who do you think is closest to it in terms of?
I really don't think that anybody is the closest to it, simply because all of the economies are capitalist.
And even China and North Korea, right? What do you? Okay. So
yeah, China is definitely a capitalist country. I mean, Jack Ma is probably one of the most well-known billionaires out of China. He owns his own businesses. There are numerous people in China that own their own businesses and employ workers. So that, by definition, makes China communist. They also have private capital accumulation, which is one of the defining traits of a capitalist society.
Okay, so I myself would actually ground politics, right, my political worldview and the economic worldview based on the foundations of my own moral code, right? So what I think is right or wrong would dictate or make like a ripple of implications on how I view or how I think society and politics should preside in reality, right? So how does your morality, your moral subjectivism, relate to your views on socialism? How does that
Making
work?
people's lives better. Making people's lives better, ensuring that people can live a happier, more fulfilling life, that people can feel more interconnected and feel that they have more of a purpose or a meaning within a society, that they feel that they can actively contribute to a society more, and that they have more autonomy within both, not just within the social aspects of the society, but also within the economic aspects of the society.
So I guess it's more of like, because in your moral code, right, you believe in the maximization of happiness and well-being for every person on earth. Like, I wouldn't say purely equally, but more of like within reason. Within reason. Yeah, within a reasonable framework. Therefore, when it is applied in a political situation, right? Like, what kind of government would that require? With also including practical terms, like is it a presidential democracy, a parliamentary? Is it a dictatorship? What do you think is the best way?
Democracy, because I believe I'm a huge fan of democracy. I believe that people participating in a system and being able to collectively choose who is going to represent them as leaders and who is going to take the responsibility of leading the society forward in a progressive manner should be something that is
assuming it is Republican, right? That the people dictate who is the leader, right? But what kind of structure would the government have? Is it a unitary presidential government?
For me personally, I would prefer the structure that I have here in the United States of America.
Okay, with
granted, some flaws right now, but that's more due to the perversion of what the Constitution actually states, rather than upholding what it actually states.
Okay, cool. So it's a federal government with basically just the USA, but
a constant. But Canada has a good system. I'd say that the United Kingdom, while it has what I would consider some flaws, is a successful system. Germany is a successful. So as long as it's a democracy that includes the I guess you could say the say of the people that are within that democracy or within that nation, that it's okay. I don't think there's one version of democracy that is the best. I think it's whatever is going to work best for the people that are a part of that nation.
Right. So an adaptable democracy that reflects the best the culture and society, and the needs of it.
Culture of that particular society. Yes.
Okay, cool. So so you're a socialist Democrat, that I would call that, and you're probably you would have voted for Bernie, but I guess you settled for Biden. Yes. Okay, so in terms of that, what kind of changes would you desire for the U.S. government? Because I don't think you feel that it is the most ideal market socialist country that you want it to be.
Certainly not.
Yeah, but so what kind of changes would you desire?
Transitioning to a market socialist economy, I don't think really has much to do with the government, other than, so for me, moving to a market socialist economy would just be the adaptation and the establishment of what are called worker co-ops, whereby when an economic firm has at or over a certain number of employees, the government would mandate that all employees must be considered essentially owners of that company. I do think that there is a level at which this would be unnecessary. If somebody starts a business and there's only 4 people working there, I would argue that in that scenario that there isn't a need to mandate that it be a worker co-op, because when a company is that small, it pretty much already is. Most of the people are equally doing their own share to keep the company going. But when you start to get into 15, 20, 30, 100, 200, 500 employees, I think it's better that all employees have a democratic say in how the company should be operated. But in terms of restructuring of the political system, one of the biggest things that I think needs to happen, especially here in the United States of America, and I would argue, I think that there could be a reasonable case that it should occur in many other countries, is the removal of the influence of money in the political system and the ability for special interest groups representing the needs of extraordinarily wealthy individuals and the businesses that they run having a say over what type of legislation is going to be passed. Because what we see when this occurs, and I don't know if you live in the United States or not, but in the instance that you don't, what happens here is that really, really rich people that run really, really big, successful businesses, people like Jeff Bezos, can hire a bunch of other people to go to Congress and literally pay legislators money to pass legislation that benefits his wealth and benefits his power, generally by preserving and expanding it. And this almost always comes to the detriment of the society as a whole. And I think that it's gross. I think that it's really nothing more than a oligarchy for the modern age, I guess you could say.
Okay. Well, I guess that in terms of when you want to transition into a market socialist country, right? I guess you're going to challenge capitalist belief systems and values, right?
Absolutely.
So how would you push that if you were to implement it, right? Like because I know America is a very individualistic country, right? And the center,
exactly. And I think market socialism would help to foster that sense of individualism, honestly.
How?
Well, because it makes people feel that individually they are more important to a company than what most people feel today. I've worked for decently large companies. I've even worked for smaller ones, and I have to say, and the thing is the sentiment that I'm about to express is not something that's it's a sentiment that is ubiquitous here in the United States, where most people don't really feel like individually they are really a part of a company, that they're just another cog in a machine that could be replaced just as easily as they could be let go just as easily as they were hired. So what a market socialist economy would do is essentially shift the economy so that it is structured more around the individuals, so that it is structured more around how the individuals feel about the economy, how they feel about where they work, and improving their level of importance to that firm, so to speak, and thus increases their autonomy.
But this is my take on socialism, right? Like China, North Korea, the USSR. A lot of countries have tried the socialist values, and capitalism seems to be the best one model for, I guess, how humans are biologically inclined to survive, right? To live. We thrive when we try to compete, when we feel that we have something that we can call our own private stuff, right? Our own individual desires and goals. So how would you fit that into the reality, right? Your desire for this sort of idealist society where everyone is treated equally, I guess. How do you put that into?
So the first thing that I would say is everybody knows the old adage. Socialism works on paper, but in the real world, it gets taken out by a CIA coup. So the second thing I want to say is I don't believe that the USSR, North Korea, or China ever were or currently are socialist. I don't think any country has ever been socialist, and I don't think they made any serious attempts to implement socialism. What I think happened is that there were people who wanted to gain power and saw that by utilizing socialism as a way to make themselves more appealing to the working class, they would be more apt to gain that power, at which point they can then establish whatever form of government they want, which almost always seem to be a totalitarian government. So what I would argue is that people like Stalin, people like Mao Zedong, people like right now Kim Jong-un, but before him Kim Jong-il, and many others were not actually socialists or communists. They were people who knew that the fastest way to get power is to appeal to the working class and gain their support, which will then propel you into power. So they utilized socialism as a means of gaining power with no real intention of actually establishing it. In terms of establishing socialism, I think that a lot of people are more into a revolutionary manner of establishing it. I'm not. I think that that's too disruptive to society. I think that we should start by establishing a social democracy, kind of the socioeconomic structures that you see in many Scandinavian countries: tuition-free higher education, universal health care, potentially things like universal basic income, strong unionization, things like that, to really show people that when we work together as a society and we make more investments into the people rather than into businesses, what happens is that the society as a whole tends to rise, and then you slowly make the transition into establishing worker cooperatives. But there was another thing that I wanted to mention, and that was that I personally do not believe that humans work best when we compete with each other, and I think that the whole of human history, going back several hundreds of thousands, or at least a couple hundred thousands of years, I should say, seems to demonstrate that actually humans tend to do better when they cooperate together, when they work together. Sort of this rising tide lifts all boats sort of analogy, that instead of competing with each other in this sort of dog eat dog, first come first serve manner, that if we work together we can all succeed together, and then that means more people will end up succeeding, and you increase happiness, health, and well-being in the long run. And I think that this is why humans have developed to become a social species, and I think that we actually observe this in the vast majority of animal species on the planet, that especially in species like humans, cats, dogs, not so much cats and dogs because there is a level of high individualism there, but especially in other creatures like animals, and other animals like bees or ants, because insects are animals. It's all about working together. I do believe in a collective society, but I do believe in the preservation of a level of individualism, because I do think that is necessary to the proper functioning of a collectivist society.
Okay, but in terms of what you said about that there were never any socialist countries before, right? I would say that there were actually people who believed in these ideals, right, and attempted to apply them into their governments, right? But the thing is that what a politically right person would say is that power corrupts. Absolute power just corrupts absolutely, right? So in a way, for example, like some guys like Kim Jong-il or Mao Zedong, right? Lenin, they might have had real, genuine ideals for socialism, but eventually they succumbed to greed and power hunger, and that eventually that's what happens when when people have this kind of power, to dictate to.
I can agree, but I don't think that's a failure of socialism. I think that's a failure of the methods that were utilized to implement it. Rather than collectively and incrementally moving a society as a whole toward a better, what I would argue is a better economic structure, they looked to one leader to forcefully move the society in that direction, and that led to corruption, to greed, and things like that. So I would, and this is why I stated that I do believe in an incremental move towards socialism rather than some single revolutionary coming and trying to force a society in that direction, because that would be why people like Mao, people like Lenin, people like Stalin failed. People like Castro failed. It's not because their ideas were necessarily wrong. It's that the ways in which they tried to implement their ideas was just done in entirely the wrong manner.
So if we're now we're looking at, in your ideal society, is a democratic society where the government is, has checks and balances and is not a central power, but still has the socialism, the ideal one that Karl Marx wrote in, right? That the one he had pictured in his mind.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So it's not okay. So other than that, right? Like in terms of how you view, let's say, just human rights or freedom or these liberties, what do you think grounds them? Because you mentioned in your political view that every person should retain some level of individualism. I agree, but what is individualism to you, and why should the individual be valued in any way if you're looking at a purely materialist worldview?
So for me, individualism is the idea that people should have a level of individual autonomy to operate as they please without the society collectively telling them what they ought to do. For me, I ground it in my epistemology, that I believe that maximizing happiness, health, and well-being for as many people as we can is the best way forward, because it reduces harm, it reduces suffering, it reduces poverty and crime, which all the sociological studies have shown. Now, people can argue, well, that's what you believe subjectively, but somebody might disagree. And I would say, yeah, there are probably people that disagree, but I would venture to guess that the vast majority of people on this planet really do want what's best for everybody, at least in their own minds.
So it's more of like we humans have these rights and right to have liberty and individualism because it's more pragmatic for society to do
it's more
so?
Pragmatic. It's more pragmatic, it's more egalitarian, and I think when it comes to human rights, I don't think that there's some divine aspect to that. I think that humans grant ourselves...
It's a socially constructed concept, right?
Yeah. Yes, and I think a lot of that stems out of the fact that humans are a very, very social species. And I think that understanding that when we work together and understanding that when we care for one another as a species, collectively, we tend to succeed much more than we would if we did not have these virtues. And thus, valuing these virtues and pushing to better these virtues would very likely lead to a much more successful society in general.
Okay, well, now you presented, we talk about your specific worldview, right? Metaphysics, axiology, or even your political worldview. So I want to know your take on, let's say, your critique on, let's say, someone who's religious, right? And who is on the right side of the political spectrum, probably mostly a Christian, of course, evangelical, let's say. How would you criticize their thought process and seeing the world differently than you do, right? Like their metaphysics includes a God, their epistemology includes something like they call faith, how would you let's say, not like destroy, but just criticize their thought process, and let's say there's something you're missing here, and this is how you can do better. How would you say?
So one of the reasons that I am opposed to religion is because it is it is a power hierarchy, and I believe in abolishing power hierarchies because I just don't think that they're beneficial to the success of the human race. However, that being said, I wouldn't necessarily state that in every instance a person's religiosity is inherently bad. I think that for a lot of people, especially here in the United States of America with evangelical conservatives, that their religion is sort of the root or the foundation for the other aspects of their worldviews that I would take issue with, such as I believe that religiosity leads to a greater sense of traditionalism. And I believe that traditionalism is the antithesis of progress and thus holds a society back. And when you hold a society back, you don't advance in the future, and thusly you don't actually improve anything. And I think that that's probably one of my biggest criticisms of evangelical conservatism in the United States, is that it is highly traditionalist. And I'm just a huge critic of conservatism in general, mainly because of its traditionalist structures, its excuse me, its opposition to progress, its favoritism of authoritarians, or rather authority, I should say, things like that. I don't think that those are ideals that are going to best serve society moving forward. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that they're ideals that best move society forward in a progressive, egalitarian, and what I would consider moral or ethical manner.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Awesome. Well, Devin, we're almost an hour now, and I want to ask you one last question but it's been a great interview, bro. I've loved talking to you, learning your perspective on things. I guess my question is, like, if you were to suggest to someone who, let's say, who's born in the right side of the country, right, in the U.S., and wants to look into this stuff deeper, right, and look at some resources, what would you suggest? And you could promote your stuff too.
Well, in terms of if somebody was, say, sort of, I was raised an evangelical conservative. Those have kind of been my ideals growing up. But, I try to be open-minded. I want to see if maybe there are better worldviews, better ideas out there that I might be able to adhere to. What I would say to them is to just ensure that you set aside all of your biases. Mm-hmm. Everything, every bias that you have, do your best to set it aside. Examine the data. And when I say examine the data, I don't mean go to Google and look for the first article that confirms something you already believe to be true. I mean actually sit down with professionals in these fields, ask them the tough questions, and press them on it. Because that's how they're going to answer them. That's how you're gonna figure out what is true. Don't be afraid to internally critique your own ideals. Don't be afraid to internally critique the things that you believe. And try to get ideas from the other side of the aisle. One person, for anybody that's wondering, that really wants to know what leftism is about and why people who are leftists or socialists believe what they believe, the one person that I would recommend to them, quite frankly, would be Vosh on YouTube, because I think he does a very, very good job of defending what leftism is really about and distinguishing it from liberalism, which I think is just based more in identity politics and virtue signaling. And I think that a lot of people can agree with that. And I do think that there is a strong distinction to be made between liberalism and leftism. But I would just say, just think critically. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to question what you believe. And don't be afraid to question authorities. And when you go to look for research, when you go to look at data, make sure you're cross-referencing it with known, reputable sources. Make sure you're looking at the methodologies that are used and the assumptions that are made so that you can understand why certain conclusions were reached. And if you ever see something that seems to be true, but it conflicts with what you believe, maybe consider that you might actually be wrong on this, and maybe you should change your beliefs. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with people, regardless of what their ideals are, is that so many people get sort of set in their ways, quote unquote, and they might hear a piece of information that disagrees with what they've maybe have believed for a long time. And I think too often people just reject information, not because it's wrong, but because it doesn't agree with what they've convinced themselves must be true. I think that people need to be much more open to the fact that we might just be wrong on a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, bro, it's been an awesome conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, I very much enjoyed this.
Yeah. Bye, bro. And God bless.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me on, Elmo.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
Gearheads know that some projects need so many parts, it feels like you need a whole storage unit just to store them. That's what eBay Motors' 122 million parts are for. Think of it as your virtual parts garage. They've always got the right fitment at the right prices. Use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.